As we all go through life, we all have life experiences, and hopefully you grow.
The silence broke like glass shattering in an empty room. For days, Cleveland had been holding its breath, watching their former coach, Kevin Stefanski, stand at a podium in Atlanta, smiling, thriving, talking about visions and championships with an 83-year-old billionaire who just cooked him steaks at his private estate. And then, Arthur Blank opened his mouth and said the words that turned Cleveland's world upside down. In Kevin Stefanski, we have found a coach with the right vision, focus, and demeanor to lead our team into the future. But it was what came next that felt like a slap across Ohio. Blank didn't just hire Stefanski, he fired back, hard, at everything Cleveland represents. If you want to see how a billionaire declares war on an entire organization without ever saying their name, smash that subscribe button right now, because this story is about pride, revenge, and what happens when one of the NFL's most powerful owners decides he's done watching his team lose while Cleveland continues its cycle of dysfunction. Let's be brutally honest about what just happened here. Arthur Blank, the Home Depot co-founder worth $9 billion, didn't just hire Kevin Stefanski to coach the Atlanta Falcons. He made a statement, a loud, public, impossible-to-ignore statement that Cleveland screwed up, that they had a two-time Coach of the Year sitting in their building and threw him away like yesterday's trash. That Jimmy Haslam, the owner who has hired and fired coaches like he's changing socks, just made the biggest mistake of his NFL career. And Blank did it all without ever mentioning Cleveland's name. That's power. That's class. That's what 13 years of organizational humiliation looks like when it finally comes back to haunt you. The timeline of this disaster is almost poetic. January 5th, 2026, the Browns fire Stefanski after a 5-12 season that saw them finish with the second-worst offense in the entire NFL. 45 wins and 56 losses over 6 years, 8 wins and 26 losses over the last 2 seasons. It looked defensible. It looked like the right move. General manager Andrew Berry stood at a podium and defended keeping his job while Stefanski took the fall. Owner Jimmy Haslam passionately insisted that Berry was the right guy, that the roster issues weren't his fault, that Stefanski's message had grown stale. The narrative was set. Stefanski failed. Cleveland moved on. End of story. Except it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far worse. 13 days later, on January 18th, Kevin Stefanski sat in Arthur Blank's home for an all-day interview that ended with a legendary steak dinner. Blank himself was at the grill, personally cooking for the man he was about to make the 20th head coach in Falcons history. They talked for 90 minutes about football, about vision, about culture, and when the steaks were finished, Stefanski had a 5-year contract offer sitting in front of him. He took it, and just like that, the second-best coaching candidate on the market was off the board. Only John Harbaugh, who went to the Giants for $100 million over 5 years, was hired faster. Think about what that means. The Browns fired Stefanski believing he was part of the problem, and the rest of the NFL said, "You're wrong." The Falcons, a franchise with 4 all-pro players on their roster, with Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts, and a defense that recorded 57 sacks in 2025, looked at Stefanski's resume and said, "This is our guy." Matt Ryan, the franchise legend who just became president of football with 0 experience, looked at Stefanski and said, "This is the man I trust to lead us to a championship." And Arthur Blank, who has been trying to win a Super Bowl since 2002, who was heartbroken after blowing a 28-3 lead to the Patriots in Super Bowl 51, looked at Stefanski and said, "I believe in you." But it gets worse for Cleveland, so much worse. Within 48 hours of Stefanski's hire, offensive coordinator Tommy Rees, who spent 1 year with the Browns and coordinated the 31st ranked offense in the league, agreed to follow Stefanski to Atlanta and become the Falcons' offensive coordinator. Think about that. The Browns interviewed Rees for their head coaching job, signaling they wanted to keep him around. But Rees looked at the situation and said, "I'd rather go work for the guy you just fired." That's not just a professional decision. That's a vote of no confidence. That's Reese saying the problem in Cleveland wasn't Stefanski, it was everything else. And the NFL world noticed. Analysts immediately started calling it what it was, a scoreboard. Stefanski versus Andrew Berry, the coach who got fired versus the general manager who kept his job. And in 2026, everyone will be watching. If Stefanski succeeds in Atlanta while the Browns continue to flounder, it won't just be embarrassing, it'll be proof that Cleveland made the wrong call. Again. But Arthur Blank wasn't done. When he announced the hire, his statement was surgical, calculated. Every word felt like it was chosen to twist the knife just a little bit deeper into Cleveland's heart. From all our research and a wonderful visit with him tonight, I believe he is the right coach to take the talent on our roster to a new level. Translation: you had talent in Cleveland too, Jimmy. You just didn't know how to use it. He has a great plan for his staff, and he's learned many things during his stops in Cleveland and Minnesota that have prepared him for this moment. Translation: Cleveland was a learning experience, a stepping stone, a place where good coaches go to figure out what not to do.
And then Blank dropped the hammer. Our objective is to win games and contend for championships every year, and that is where our shared focus will remain. Championships, every year, shared focus. These aren't just corporate buzzwords. This is Arthur Blank reminding everyone that Cleveland hasn't won anything since 1964, that they've had one playoff win since 1994, that they've been to the playoffs 3 times since returning to the NFL in 1999, and 2 of those trips came under Kevin Stefanski, the man they just fired. The emotional weight of this cannot be overstated. Kevin Stefanski poured 6 years of his life into Cleveland. He took over a franchise that had gone 17 years without a playoff appearance and got them there in his first season. He won Coach of the Year in 2020 after going 11-5 and beating the Steelers in the wildcard round. He did it again in 2023 after going 11-6 while starting 5 different quarterbacks because of injuries. He worked with 15 different starting quarterbacks across his career. Baker Mayfield, Case Keenum, Jacoby Brissett, Deshaun Watson, Joe Flacco, Shedeur Sanders, and somehow, some way, he found ways to win games with all of them. But Cleveland didn't appreciate it. They didn't value it. They saw the 8-26 record over 2 years and decided that was all that mattered. They ignored the fact that Deshaun Watson was an $80 million cap hit and a complete disaster. They ignored that the offensive line fell apart due to injuries and poor roster construction. They ignored that the wide receiver room was one of the worst in the NFL. They blamed Stefanski and moved on. And now Arthur Blank gets to reap the benefits. He gets a coach who has been through the fire, who knows what it's like to deal with dysfunction and chaos, who has learned from his mistakes, who is hungry to prove he's better than his record suggests. And Blank put his money where his mouth was. A 5-year deal. That's commitment. That's belief. That's everything Cleveland refused to give.
Meanwhile, back in Berea, the Browns are scrambling. Their coaching search is in shambles. Mike McDaniel withdrew to take an offensive coordinator job with the Chargers rather than continue pursuing Cleveland. Jesse Minter canceled his second interview because he'd rather wait for better opportunities. The top 2 candidates, John Harbaugh and Kevin Stefanski, are already off the board, and now they're stuck interviewing young coordinators like Grant Udinski and hoping someone bites. But here's the emotional gut punch that Cleveland fans have to live with. Baker Mayfield, the quarterback they drafted first overall in 2018, the guy who led them to their first playoff win in over 2 decades, just went on social media and destroyed Kevin Stefanski publicly. Still waiting on a text/call from him after I got shipped off like a piece of garbage. Can't wait to see you twice a year, coach. That tweet wasn't just about Mayfield's hurt feelings. It was a warning. Stefanski is in the NFC South now. Tampa Bay is in the NFC South, and Mayfield is going to see his former coach twice a year, and he's coming for blood. Skip Bayless amplified the noise, calling the Stefanski hire a big mistake and saying he's overrated. But who's really overrated here? The The coach who won Coach of the Year twice, or the Browns organization that has gone through 13 different head coaches since 1999 and has one playoff win to show for it? Arthur Blank knows the answer. That's why his statement felt less like a hire and more like a declaration of war. He's essentially telling Cleveland, you had your chance, you wasted it, now watch what I do with your leftovers. And in the NFL, where egos are massive and pride is everything, that's the ultimate insult. Let's talk about what Stefanski is walking into in Atlanta. The Falcons haven't made the playoffs since 2017. 8 straight years of missing the postseason. 3 head coaches in the last 6 years. A quarterback situation that's a complete mess, with Michael Penix Jr. recovering from a torn ACL and Kirk Cousins likely heading to free agency. No first-round pick in 2026 because they traded it away. This is not an easy job. This is not a guaranteed success story. But it's also not Cleveland, and that might be the most important factor. Stefanski gets to work with Matt Ryan, a guy who played 15 years in Atlanta and knows the organization inside and out. He gets to work with an owner who will be patient, who understands that rebuilding takes time, who won't panic after one bad season. He gets to work with the defensive coordinator, Jeff Ulbrich, who just led the Falcons to a franchise record 57 sacks and is being retained. And he gets to work with elite talent like Bijan Robinson, who is a first-team All-Pro running back in 2025, and Kyle Pitts, who finally showed flashes of the player he can be. Compare that to Cleveland. Stefanski had to work under Jimmy Haslam, an owner who has proven time and again that he meddles, panics, and makes impulsive decisions. He had to work with Andrew Berry, a general manager whose fingerprints are all over the Deshaun Watson disaster and the offensive line collapse. He had to work with a roster that had gaping holes everywhere and no clear path forward. The emotional toll of that environment cannot be underestimated. And now, he's free. The Browns, meanwhile, are stuck in purgatory. They can't hire anyone until they satisfy the Rooney Rule, which requires 2 in-person interviews with minority candidates. They lost one of those candidates when Mike McDaniel withdrew. Now they're scrambling to find another just to check a box. And all the while, the rest of the league is watching and laughing, because this is peak Cleveland Browns. This is what they do. They find ways to lose even when they're not playing games. Arthur Blank's statement after the hire wasn't just about Kevin Stefanski. It was about sending a message to Cleveland, to the NFL, to everyone who doubted that the Falcons could turn this around. He said, we're serious, we're committed, we're done being mediocre. And the fact that he's saying it with Cleveland's former coach standing next to him makes it even sweeter. Kevin Stefanski himself released a statement that dripped with emotion. I'm beyond thrilled to be charged with leading this iconic franchise. I am grateful to Mr. Blank and Matt Ryan for trusting me to coach this football team. We share a vision for this football team that I believe will make Falcons fans everywhere proud. That word, trust, is doing a lot of work in that sentence, because Cleveland didn't trust him. They gave up on him, and now he gets to prove them wrong on a national stage. The NFL is a ruthless business. Coaches get fired all the time, but what makes this situation different is how fast Stefanski landed on his feet and how definitively it exposes Cleveland's dysfunction. If Stefanski had struggled to find a job, if he'd been out of work for months, if teams had passed on him repeatedly, then maybe Cleveland's decision would look justified. But that's not what happened. Stefanski was the second coach hired, one of the hottest names on the market, and now he's in a division with Baker Mayfield, who hates him, and in a conference where he can build something special. Arthur Blank firing back wasn't about trash talk. It wasn't about being petty. It was about proving a point. The Falcons are ascending, the Browns are stuck, and the man who was supposed to save Cleveland is now the man who might just save Atlanta. That's not just irony, that's poetry, that's karma, that's everything Jimmy Haslam deserves for running his franchise into the ground year after year after year. The Browns will eventually hire someone. Maybe it's Grant Tedinsky, the 30-year-old wonderkid. Maybe it's Jim Schwartz, the defensive-minded veteran. Maybe it's someone else entirely. But whoever it is, they're walking into a nightmare. A franchise with no stability, an owner who doesn't know how to stay out of the way, a general manager whose roster decisions have been questionable at best, and a fan base that is traumatized by decades of losing. Good luck with that. Meanwhile, Kevin Stefanski gets to coach Bijan Robinson. He gets to develop Michael Penix Jr. He gets to work with Arthur Blank, one of the most respected owners in the NFL. He gets to prove that he was never the problem in Cleveland. The organization was. And when the Falcons start winning games in 2026, when they start competing in the NFC South, when they start making playoff runs, Arthur Blank's statement will echo even louder. In Kevin Stefanski, we have found a coach with the right vision, focus, and demeanor to lead our team into the future. Cleveland had that coach. They let him walk, and now they get to watch him succeed somewhere else while they continue their endless cycle of dysfunction, disappointment, and despair. That's not just a bad break. That's not just bad luck. That's self-inflicted. That's organizational incompetence, and that's why Arthur Blank's words cut so deep. This story is based on official statements from the Atlanta Falcons, Cleveland Browns, ESPN,